Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. 7 years into being a paramedic, you develop this sixth sense about calls that aren't what they seem. Most days in Denver, it's straightforward stuff: heart attacks, broken bones, overdoses. But that Saturday in early October, when dispatch sent me and my partner Kevin to a penthouse on 17th Street, everything about it felt wrong from the moment we stepped into that marble lobby. Rich people don't usually call 911 for minor injuries. They have private doctors who make house calls. Yet here we were, heading up to the 40th floor because some woman supposedly tripped down her stairs and needed immediate attention. Kevin was checking our supplies when the elevator opened directly into the apartment. One of those setups where you need a special key just to access the floor. Place was immaculate, all white furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown, the kind of space that probably cost more per month than I made in a year. She was sitting on a cream-colored couch, pressing a towel to her forehead, wearing what looked like designer pajamas even though it was past 4 in the afternoon. Blonde hair pulled back in a perfect bun, makeup still flawless despite the circumstances. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said, and her voice had this practiced quality, like she'd rehearsed the words. Such a silly accident, really. These marble stairs, you know how slippery they can be. Kevin started with the standard questions while I knelt beside her, pulling on my gloves. Her name was Melissa, she told us, and she'd been home alone all day working on some charity event planning when she'd gone upstairs to grab something and lost her footing on the way back down. The cut on her forehead was minor, barely needed a butterfly bandage, but protocol meant checking for concussion symptoms and other injuries. When I asked her to remove the cashmere cardigan so I could check her arms for fractures, she hesitated for just a second before complying. That's when I saw them. Bruises along her upper arms in distinct patterns, the kind you get when someone grabs you hard enough to leave fingerprints. Purple-yellow ones that were at least a week old, overlapping with fresher blue-black marks. "Melissa, I need to check your ribs and back for any impact injuries from the fall," I said, keeping my voice neutral and professional. She nodded but wouldn't meet my eyes anymore, just stared at this spot on the white carpet like it held all the answers in the world. When she lifted her pajama top just enough for me to examine her torso, I saw more bruises, concentrated on her left side, some shaped like shoe prints, others just formless patches of damaged tissue in various stages of healing. None of them, absolutely none, matched the pattern you'd see from someone tumbling downstairs. I'd seen enough domestic violence victims to recognize the signs, but before I could formulate how to approach this, she grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "Please," she whispered, glancing at the elevator. "We need to hurry before he gets home." Right then, the elevator chimed. Kevin and I both turned toward the sound as the doors slid open, revealing a man in a crisp police uniform. He was maybe 40, clean-shaven, built like someone who spent serious time at the gym, and he moved into the apartment with this deliberate confidence that made the air feel heavier. "Everything all right here, honey?" he asked, but he was looking at us, not her. His smile was perfect. Too perfect, like he'd practiced it in front of a mirror, until he got the exact right amount of teeth showing. Melissa's entire body changed. She straightened up, pulled her cardigan back on, and that rehearsed voice returned. "Just a little fall, sweetheart. These nice paramedics are taking wonderful care of me." He walked closer, and I noticed his uniform was impeccable, but something about it seemed wrong. The badge was slightly different from the Denver PD ones I saw every day. The shoulder patches had a weird sheen to them, and his duty belt looked more like something from a costume shop than actual police gear. "Officer Thompson," he said, extending his hand to Kevin first, then to me. His grip was unnecessarily firm, the kind that's meant to establish dominance. "Appreciate you folks coming out, but I think we're all set here. Just a little tumble. Happens to the clumsy one all the time." He laughed, but it was hollow, mechanical, and Melissa joined in with her own forced giggle that made my skin prickle. Kevin was already packing up, ready to leave, but I kept watching how Melissa had positioned herself, subtly putting the coffee table between her and him. Actually, we need to complete our assessment, I said, pulling out my tablet to fill in the report. Department protocol for head injuries, you understand. Thompson's smile flickered for just a moment, like a glitch in his performance. He moved around the coffee table and Melissa shifted accordingly, maintaining distance in this horrible dance they seemed to know by heart. Of course, he said, but his hand moved to rest on his belt, right where his gun would be. Though I'm sure my wife is fine. Aren't you, honey? The way he said wife had this possessive edge that made me want to get Melissa out of there immediately. I pretended to check something on my tablet while actually switching to our dispatch screen, typing a quick request for verification of Officer Thompson's badge number, which I'd memorized from his uniform. Kevin was giving me looks, clearly wanting to wrap this up and move on to the next call, but I kept stalling, asking Melissa unnecessary follow-up questions about allergies, medical history, anything to buy time. Thompson stood there the whole time, never moving more than a few feet from her, his presence like a weight pressing down on the room. The response from dispatch came through on my screen, and I had to read it twice to make sure I understood correctly. No Officer Thompson in Denver PD. No officer with that badge number. More concerning was the additional note that popped up. This address had been flagged in the system. My partner must have seen my expression change because he stopped packing and really looked at me for the first time since Thompson arrived. I turned the tablet toward him, letting him read the screen while I kept talking to maintain the illusion of a normal call. The flag on the address included a note from last year: domestic homicide, victim female, suspect never apprehended, apartment supposedly vacant since the investigation closed. Kevin's face went pale as he processed this information, and I saw him subtly unclip his radio from his belt. Thompson must have noticed the shift in our energy, because his whole demeanor changed. The fake smile disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "I think you folks have done enough here," he said, stepping between us and Melissa. "My wife needs to rest." But Melissa wasn't looking at him anymore. She was staring directly at me with desperate eyes, mouthing something I couldn't quite catch. Then I realized what she was trying to tell me. She wasn't his wife, she wasn't even supposed to be here, and neither was he. "We're required to transport any head injury for further evaluation," Kevin said, finding his voice and moving closer to Melissa. "Hospital policy after the recent liability issues." It was a lie, but a good one, and Thompson couldn't know our actual protocols. For a moment, the room went completely still, everyone frozen in position like we were waiting for someone to make the first move. Thompson's hand drifted toward his hip again, and that's when I noticed something that made my chest tighten. Dark stains on the white carpet near the stairs, the kind that someone had tried to clean but couldn't quite get out. Old blood, soaked too deep into the fibers to ever fully disappear. Melissa saw me looking and gave the tiniest nod, confirming what I was starting to piece together. This wasn't just a domestic violence situation. We were standing in a crime scene that was supposedly cleared a year ago, with people who shouldn't exist. Kevin had his radio in hand now, speaking clearly into it. "Unit 47 requesting immediate backup at our current location, possible 1054. The code for a suspicious person, and Thompson definitely knew what it meant. His face contorted into something ugly, dropping all pretense of being a cop or a concerned husband. "You stupid little..." He started moving toward Kevin, but I grabbed Melissa's arm and pulled her toward the elevator. She came willingly, almost desperately, and for the first time, I felt how cold her skin was, unnaturally cold, like she'd been sitting in a freezer. The elevator doors were still open, thank God, and we rushed inside just as Thompson lunged forward. Kevin managed to dodge him and dive into the elevator with us, jamming the close button repeatedly, until the doors finally started sliding shut. Thompson's face appeared in the narrowing gap, no longer human in its rage, and then we were descending. Melissa collapsed against the wall the moment we started moving, and under the elevator's harsh fluorescent lights, I could see what I'd missed before. Her skin had a grayish tinge, her eyes were slightly clouded, and when she breathed, it seemed more like habit than necessity. "He killed me," she whispered, her voice different now, hollow and distant. Last February, right on those stairs. He was never a real cop, just liked pretending, liked the power. But after he killed me, he couldn't let go. Kept coming back, kept pretending everything was normal, that I was still his wife. And somehow I couldn't leave either. Stuck in that apartment, going through the motions, calling for help over and over, but no one ever came. Until today. Kevin and I exchanged glances, both of us trying to process what we were hearing, what we'd just experienced. When the elevator reached the lobby, Melissa was gone. Simply not there anymore, like she'd never been there at all. Security footage later showed Kevin and me entering and leaving alone. No woman, no Officer Thompson, nothing but two paramedics responding to a call that dispatch swore they never sent. Real cops went up to check the apartment after our report, found it exactly as it should have been. Empty, covered in dust, untouched since the crime scene tape came down months ago. The blood stains were there on the carpet, just like I'd seen, but they were old, documented in the original case file. Rebecca Hartley, the victim's actual name, had been killed by her boyfriend, Daniel Morrison, who'd been obsessed with law enforcement, collected fake badges and uniforms. He'd disappeared after the murder, still wanted for questioning. Kevin and I never talked about what happened after that day, just filed our reports and moved on. But I started checking the obituaries more carefully, cross-referencing addresses with my calls. Turned out ours wasn't the only unit that had been sent to empty apartments lately. Places where violent deaths had occurred, where someone was still calling for help that never quite came in time. I quit being a paramedic 6 months later, told everyone it was burnout, too many rough calls catching up with me. But the truth was simpler and harder to explain. I couldn't shake the feeling that every victim I couldn't save was still out there somewhere, trapped in their worst moment, waiting for someone to finally get it right. Sometimes I dream about that elevator ride, about Melissa's cold hand in mine, about the relief on her face when she finally got to tell someone the truth. And sometimes, when my phone rings late at night and there's nothing but static on the other end, I wonder if she's still trying to call for help, or if maybe, just maybe, she's calling to say thank you. Either way, I never answer anymore. Some calls you're just not equipped to handle twice. My partner Jamie and I had been running the night shift for nearly 6 years when we got the call that changed everything. It was a Wednesday in early November, around 11:30 p.m., and dispatch sent us to a cardiac arrest at 4827 Willow Court. Nothing unusual about that, except when we pulled up to the small ranch-style house, something immediately seemed wrong. No lights were on, no neighbors standing outside watching, no family member frantically waving us in. Just a dark house with overgrown grass and newspapers piled on the porch. Jamie grabbed the monitor, while I hauled the med bag, and we rushed to the front door, which was unlocked. The smell hit us before we even made it past the threshold, that unmistakable sweetness mixed with decay that told us we were way too late. We found Harold Brennan in his recliner, TV remote still in his hand, clearly gone for at least 24 hours, maybe longer. Standard protocol kicked in and we called it in to dispatch while checking for any signs of foul play. Nothing suspicious, just an elderly man who died alone watching television. What bothered me was how dispatch had gotten the call in the first place. When I radioed back to confirm the DOA, our dispatcher Carla sounded confused. She said the caller had been crystal clear, gave the exact address, said he was having chest pain and trouble breathing. Male voice, older, matched what you'd expect from someone Brennan's age. But here's where it got weird. The phone on the side table next to Brennan's body wasn't even plugged into the wall jack, and when I checked the kitchen phone, same thing, cord wrapped up neat and tucked behind it. Jamie and I figured maybe Brennan had a cell phone somewhere, so while we waited for the coroner, we searched the place. No cell phone, no tablet, nothing. The neighbor, an older woman named Dorothy, who came over when she saw the ambulance, told us Harold's landline had been disconnected for months after some billing dispute with the phone company. She'd been bringing him groceries twice a week, and hadn't seen him since Monday, which lined up with our estimate of time of death. Dorothy mentioned Harold didn't believe in cell phones, said they gave you brain cancer. The coroner arrived, did his thing, and we packed up our gear to head back. On the ride back, Jamie kept asking how someone with no working phone could call 911. And honestly, I had no answer that made any sense. 4 days later, same shift. Carla's voice came over the radio with an edge of panic I'd never heard from her before. Another cardiac arrest call. And when she gave the address, Jamie nearly drove us off the road. 4827 Willow Court. We both knew Harold Brennan was sitting in the county morgue, waiting for his nephew to fly in from Oregon for the funeral arrangements. Carla insisted someone had just called. Same male voice, saying he couldn't breathe. Chest pains. Please send help immediately. We drove to the house anyway, found it exactly as we'd left it. Yellow tape across the door, windows dark. Jamie called dispatch from his personal cell while I stood there staring at those dark windows, and Carla played us the recording. It was Harold Brennan's voice, or something so close to it that it made the hair on my arm stand straight up. The calls kept coming, every single night at exactly 11:30 p.m. Not 11:29, not 11:31, but 11:30 on the dot. Different dispatchers started reporting variations in what they heard. Carla heard him pleading for help, gasping between words. Mike from the day shift, who stayed late one night just to experience it, heard Harold calmly stating his address and symptoms like he was reading from a script. Another dispatcher, Nancy, swore she heard him say, "Please hurry," over and over, nothing else. The IT department got involved, traced the calls to a line that had been officially disconnected 3 months before Harold died. They checked and rechecked their systems, brought in consultants, even had the phone company send technicians to physically inspect the old copper lines running to the house. Everything came back the same. Those calls were coming from inside our own 911 system, like an echo bouncing around in there with nowhere to go. By the second week, word had spread through the whole department. Cops started parking outside Harold's house at 11:25, waiting. The nephew had come and gone, taking what he wanted from the house, leaving it empty except for the furniture nobody wanted. The realtor handling the sale refused to go near the place after dark. Jamie started taking different shifts, said he couldn't handle hearing about it anymore, but I kept volunteering for nights. Maybe I needed to understand it, or maybe I just couldn't let it go. I'd sit in the ambulance bay listening to the scanner, and right at 11:30, without fail, dispatch would key up with that familiar tension in their voice. Same address, same emergency, same dead man calling for help from a phone that didn't exist. On the third Friday since Harold died, I decided to be inside the house when the call came through. I got permission from the nephew through the realtor, told them I was checking for medical equipment we might have left behind. Really professional of me, I know. I sat in Harold's old recliner at 11:20, the same chair where we'd found him, and waited. The house had that empty house smell, dust and old carpet, with something underneath that might have been my imagination. At 11:29, I had my phone ready to record, watching the disconnected phone on the side table like it might suddenly spring to life. 11:30 came, and my radio crackled. Dispatch announced another cardiac arrest at 4827 Willow Court. But I was sitting in complete silence. No voice in the house, no sound except my own breathing and the static from my radio. I started interviewing the neighbors, telling them I was doing a report on response times for elderly residents living alone. Most had barely known Harold, just the occasional wave or nod. But then I met Gregory Vance, who lived 2 houses down. Gregory worked nights at a warehouse and told me something that made me reconsider everything. He said about a month before Harold died, he'd seen Harold's son Christopher visiting almost every night around 11. This caught my attention because Dorothy had told us Harold didn't have any kids, no family except the nephew in Oregon. Gregory described Christopher as maybe 40, average height, always wearing a baseball cap pulled low. He'd park on the street, never in the driveway, and would only stay about 20 minutes. Gregory found it odd because Harold had mentioned years ago that he never had children, one of his big regrets in life. The next morning, I pulled Harold's death certificate and medical records through a contact at the hospital. Harold had been prescribed cardiac medication 6 months ago, but the pharmacy records showed someone had been picking up his prescriptions regularly, even after his last doctor's visit 3 months before he died. The signature on the pickup forms was always different, sometimes barely legible, sometimes neat and precise. The pharmacist, when I tracked her down, remembered a younger man who said he was Harold's son, always paid cash, always seemed to know exactly what he was picking up. She described him exactly as Gregory had, down to the baseball cap. I cross-referenced Harold's financial records that were part of the probate filing, regular cash withdrawals of $200 every Monday for the past 4 months. The last withdrawal was 3 days before we found Harold's body. I convinced the detective assigned to follow up on the case, a guy named Frank Russo who owed me a favor, to look deeper into the 911 system. Frank discovered something the IT department had missed or maybe just hadn't wanted to find. The calls weren't exactly coming from inside the system. They were being injected through a maintenance port that telephone company workers use for testing lines. Someone with the right knowledge and equipment could make it appear that calls were coming from any disconnected number in the database. Frank pulled security footage from the phone company's central office building. Every night at 11:28, a figure in a telephone company uniform would enter through the employee entrance, walk straight to a specific terminal, and leave by 11:35. The uniform was legitimate, the badge was legitimate, but the employee ID belonged to someone who had died 2 years ago in a car accident. We never caught him, the man pretending to be Harold's son, Christopher. Frank set up surveillance at the phone company building, but the calls stopped the night before they were ready to make an arrest. Just stopped, like someone knew we were getting close. The security footage from previous nights was too grainy to make out facial features, and the baseball cap always obscured the face anyway. When Frank ran the partial prints from Harold's medication bottles, they came back to a Joshua Mills, who had worked for the phone company for 15 years before being fired for stealing equipment. Mills had disappeared 6 months ago after violating parole on fraud charges. His parole officer said Mills had been running a scheme where he befriended elderly people with no close family, gained access to their finances, and slowly bled them dry. Harold had been perfect for him, isolated, stubborn about technology, already on heart medication that Mills could easily withhold or overdose to create the symptoms he wanted. The theory Frank developed was that Mills had been setting up Harold's death to look natural, probably planning to continue accessing his accounts after he died using forged documents. But Harold died too soon, before Mills could get power of attorney or become a beneficiary on anything. The 911 calls were meant to establish a pattern, make it seem like Harold had been trying to get help for days before anyone responded, maybe set up a negligence lawsuit against the city or the phone company. Mills must have recordings of Harold's voice from their visits, used some kind of voice synthesizer to create the variations. When he realized we were investigating instead of just writing it off as a technical glitch, he vanished. Harold's nephew got the house sold 3 months later to a young family who never experienced any strange calls. Frank's case went cold, and Mills hasn't surfaced anywhere. Sometimes I drive past that house, see kids playing in the yard where Harold died alone, and I wonder if Mills is out there somewhere, finding another Harold, recording another voice, planning another series of calls that nobody will answer in time. Most nights as a paramedic blend together after a while, but that Tuesday in August still makes me question everything I thought I knew about my job. I'd been pulling 12-hour shifts at Station 47 for about 6 years by then, long enough that the adrenaline rush had faded into routine. My partner Blake had called in sick that night, something about food poisoning from bad sushi, so dispatch paired me with a rookie named Garrett who couldn't have been more than a month out of training. We were sitting in the rig outside a convenience store on Madison Avenue, Garrett nervously drumming his fingers on the dashboard while I scrolled through my phone. when the call came through around 2:30 in the morning. Female voice, calm but strained, reporting a possible fainting at 4827 Rosewood Drive. Nothing unusual about the address or the call itself, just another suburban medical emergency that would probably turn out to be low blood sugar or dehydration. Rosewood Drive sat in one of those neighborhoods where every house looked like it came from the same catalog. Two-story colonials with attached garages and identical mailboxes. Number 4827 stood out only because every light in the house seemed to be on, creating this weird strobe effect through the windows like someone was flipping switches randomly. I grabbed the jump bag while Garrett pulled the stretcher from the back, and that's when I noticed the front door was hanging open about 6 inches, swaying slightly in the breeze. No car in the driveway, no neighbors peering out their windows despite the light show. I announced ourselves loudly as we approached, standard protocol, expecting someone to come rushing out, or at least respond from inside. Instead, I heard this thin, reedy voice drifting down from somewhere upstairs, barely audible, but clear enough to make out the words. "I fell. Please hurry," the voice said, female, maybe middle-aged, with this odd flatness to it that made me pick up my pace. Garrett stayed by the door with the stretcher while I headed inside, medical bag slung over my shoulder, calling out that paramedics were coming up. The house had that staged feeling, like those model homes they show to potential buyers. Everything perfectly arranged, but missing any sign someone actually lived there. No family photos on the walls, no shoes by the door, no mail on the hallway table. The lights kept flickering in this rhythmic pattern, every bulb in sync dimming and brightening like the whole house was breathing. I took the stairs 2 at a time, following the voice that kept repeating from what sounded like the master bedroom at the end of the hall. "I fell, please hurry," came the call again, identical to the first time. Same inflection, same pause between words like someone had recorded it and hit replay. The hallway carpet was pristine white, the kind that would show every footprint, but mine were the only marks visible as I moved toward the bedroom door. Each room I passed was empty, not just of people but of furniture. Closets standing open to reveal nothing but bare hangers. The master bedroom door was cracked open, warm yellow light spilling out, and I could hear the voice clearly now, still repeating that same phrase with mechanical precision. I pushed the door wider with my shoulder, already running through possible scenarios in my head. Maybe a stroke victim stuck in a repetitive loop, maybe someone in shock. But when I stepped inside, the room was empty, except for a perfectly made king-size bed with hospital corners that looked like they'd been measured with a ruler. Right in the center of that bed sat an open laptop, screen facing the doorway, and the voice was coming from its speakers. "I fell, please hurry," it said again, and this time I could see the waveform on the screen, an audio file playing on repeat. I moved closer to the laptop, that familiar metallic taste of unease filling my mouth, the kind you get when your body knows something's wrong before your brain catches up. The screen showed a basic audio player, the file labeled Dispatch 847-0221.wave, with a timestamp from exactly 10 minutes earlier. My radio crackled on my belt, making me jump, Garrett's voice coming through asking if everything was okay up there. I told him to stay put, keep the exit clear, standard safety protocol when something doesn't add up. The audio file had been set to loop, and as I reached for the trackpad to stop it, I noticed something else on the screen, a minimized window at the bottom of the taskbar. When I clicked it, a browser window expanded showing the county's emergency dispatch system, the same portal we use to review our calls. Someone had accessed tonight's emergency logs, and there at the top was our current call. My unit number, the address, everything, pulled directly from the live feed. The room suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were pressing in, and I became hyper-aware of every sound in that empty house. Footsteps, or maybe just the house settling, seemed to echo from somewhere below. I clicked through the browser tabs, finding more windows open. Street view images of the house I was standing in, aerial photos showing the layout of the neighborhood, even a PDF of the county's emergency response protocols with sections highlighted in yellow about response times and standard procedures for medical calls. Someone had studied exactly how we operate, learned our patterns, our language, even the specific way dispatch phrases certain types of emergencies. The laptop's camera light was on, a tiny green dot staring at me, and when I checked the running programs, there it was, a video chat application running in the background, no user visible on the other end, but definitely connected, definitely recording. I backed away from the laptop, my hand instinctively moving to my radio, but before I could call for backup, the audio file stopped mid-phrase. The sudden silence hit like a physical force, making my ears ring, and then a new sound started from the laptop speakers, my own voice from just minutes ago, announcing ourselves at the front door. Whoever was on the other end of that video chat was playing back our arrival, had been recording from the moment we pulled up. I grabbed my radio and told Garrett to get back to the rig immediately. Forget the stretcher, just move. His confused response crackled back, but I was already heading for the stairs when I heard it, the front door slamming shut with enough force to shake the whole house. The lights went out all at once, complete darkness except for the sick blue glow of the laptop screen behind me. Still recording, still watching. My training kicked in, muscle memory guiding me along the wall toward the stairs even in the pitch black, one hand on my radio calling for immediate police backup to our location. Garrett was yelling something about the doors being locked from outside, his voice pitched high with panic, saying someone had wrapped chains around the handles while he was waiting by the rig. I made it to the top of the stairs, using my pen light to see, when I heard footsteps below, multiple sets, moving through the house with purpose, not rushing, not stumbling in the dark like they should be, but walking calmly like they could see perfectly fine. The laptop upstairs started playing another audio file, louder this time, a recording of a different emergency call, someone screaming for help, begging, the kind of sound that makes you want to cover your ears. But underneath it, I could hear real voices now. At least 3 people downstairs, talking in low, casual tones like they were discussing weekend plans. One of them laughed, this genuine, warm sound that would have been pleasant in any other context, and I heard him say something about checking the response time, seeing if they beat their last record. They were timing us, I realized, treating this whole thing like some sick game, using real emergency calls as bait. My pen light caught a figure at the bottom of the stairs, just standing there, not trying to hide, wearing regular clothes like he just walked in from a barbecue. He looked up at me with this expression of mild curiosity, like I was an unexpected but not unwelcome variable in whatever experiment they were running. Behind him I could see 2 others moving through the living room, one taking notes on a clipboard, the other adjusting what looked like a camera on a tripod. The man at the stairs raised his hand in an almost friendly wave and called up that I'd done great, really sold the authentic first responder experience, but they needed just a few more minutes of footage for their project. I didn't wait to hear what kind of project required trapping paramedics in an empty house. There was a window at the end of the upstairs hallway, one of those old-fashioned ones with the thick glass and metal frame. I sprinted for it, hearing footsteps starting up the stairs behind me, not running but walking with that same unnerving calm. The window was painted shut, probably hadn't been opened in years, but adrenaline and desperation gave me the strength to slam my shoulder into it hard enough to pop the seal. The wood frame splintered, paint chips flying everywhere, and I managed to force it up just enough to squeeze through. Behind me, the man from the stairs was saying something about property damage, his tone mildly disappointed like I'd failed to follow the rules of whatever twisted scenario they'd created. I could hear sirens in the distance, backup finally responding, but I wasn't waiting around to see if these people would stick around for the police. The drop from the 2nd floor looked farther in the dark, but I'd rather deal with a broken ankle than whatever those people had planned. I hung from the windowsill for a second, trying to gauge the distance, then let go and hit the lawn hard, rolling to absorb the impact like they taught us in training. Pain shot through my left knee, but nothing felt broken, and I was up and moving toward the ambulance where I could see Garrett pulling at the chains wrapped around the vehicle's back doors. The sirens were getting closer, maybe 2 minutes out, and when I looked back at the house, all three figures were standing at the window I'd just jumped from, watching us struggle with the chains. They weren't trying to escape or hide evidence, just observing. One of them actually filming us with his phone. Garrett and I managed to get the driver's door open. The chains only wrapped around the back, and we both scrambled inside just as the first police cruiser came screaming around the corner, lights painting the whole street red and blue. By the time the cops had the house surrounded, it was empty again, just the laptop still sitting on that bed, the video chat window closed, browser history wiped clean. They found the chains that had been on our ambulance tossed in the backyard, along with 3 folding chairs arranged in the living room facing the stairs, like they'd been sitting there waiting for a show. The police took our statements, processed the scene, even brought in a detective who specialized in what they called elaborate pranks, though we all knew this went way beyond that. They traced the laptop to a batch that had been stolen from a warehouse 6 months earlier. No way to track who had it now. The emergency call that started everything came from a burner phone, purchased with cash, activated just long enough to make that single call. Garrett quit the next week, said he couldn't handle not knowing if the next call would be real or another trap. I stayed on for another month before transferring to a different station across town, somewhere far from Rosewood Drive and whatever game those people thought they were playing with our lives. 2 months later, I got an email to my personal account, no subject line, just a video attachment. Against my better judgment, I opened it. It was footage from that night, edited together from multiple angles, showing me moving through the house, examining the laptop, jumping from the window. Professional quality, like something from a documentary complete with timestamps and my vital signs displayed in the corner, somehow pulled from my own equipment. At the end, text appeared on screen saying they'd gotten what they needed, thanking me for my participation, assuring me it was a one-time study. The email address was already deactivated when I tried to reply, and the police said the video had been routed through so many proxy servers they'd never find the source. Still work as a paramedic. Different city now, but every time I respond to a call in an empty house, especially when the door's already open, I wonder if they really meant it about it being just that one time. Sometimes when I'm reviewing call logs at the station, I'll see responses to addresses that seem too perfect, too isolated, and I'll catch myself looking for patterns, wondering if somewhere out there, another crew is walking into another experiment, another test, with someone watching and taking notes on how long it takes us to understand we're not there to save anyone. Rural Montana wasn't where I planned to end up after paramedic school, but life has a way of putting you exactly where you need to be, even if you don't realize it until much later. My classmates from 2014 were all chasing trauma center jobs in big cities, while I took the first opening I found, a small station covering 3 counties where the biggest excitement was usually a tractor accident or someone's grandpa forgetting his heart medication. 7 years in, I'd gotten comfortable with the rhythm of it all, the long drives between calls, the familiar faces, the predictable emergencies that let you feel like you were making a real difference. That Thursday night in early September changed everything, made me question whether some calls are meant to be answered at all. My partner Roger had been puking his guts out since dinner, something about bad seafood from the gas station, which left me handling the night shift alone. Dispatch came through around 11:30, with what seemed like a routine call. A young voice, maybe 9 or 10 years old, saying his dad wasn't moving and he needed help right away. The address put it way out on County Road 47, the old Hawthorne place that had been through maybe a dozen owners since I'd started this job. 45 minutes of driving through farmland that looked exactly the same in the dark, following a GPS that kept trying to route me through roads that didn't exist anymore. When I finally found the property, the mailbox hanging crooked beside a gravel driveway, Every light in the house was off except for this faint yellow glow from what looked like the front room. A boy was standing right there by the gate when my headlights swept across the yard, like he'd been waiting the whole time, perfectly still in a way that kids never are. He had this bowl cut that looked like someone had done it at home with kitchen scissors, wearing a green jacket that hung past his hands and jeans rolled up at the bottom. When I got out with my medical bag, he walked up to me with these measured steps, each one exactly the same distance apart, and said, "Thank you for coming in this formal way. That reminded me of how my grandmother made me talk to guests when I was little. My dad's in the living room just like I told them on the phone," he said, already turning toward the house, expecting me to follow. The walk to the front door couldn't have been more than 30 seconds, but it felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Like when you're swimming and suddenly realize you can't see the bottom anymore. The boy kept his hands in his pockets the whole time, never once looking back at me, just walking with this steady rhythm while dead leaves crunched under our feet. The porch had one of those old wooden swings that probably hadn't been used in years. Chains rusted so bad they looked ready to snap, and the front door was already cracked open maybe 6 inches, warm air leaking out into the cold night. "He fell down about an hour ago," the boy said, pushing the door wider with his shoulder instead of his hands, which stayed buried in those jacket pockets. I tried to wake him up, but he won't answer me. Inside, the house smelled like old coffee and something else underneath it, metallic and sharp, the way blood smells when there's a lot of it. The hallway was narrow, wood floors that creaked with every step, and the walls were covered in this faded wallpaper with little yellow flowers that probably looked cheerful once, but now just seemed sad. The boy led me past a staircase that went up into complete darkness, past closed doors on either side, straight to an archway at the end of the hall. He stopped right at the entrance and pointed inside without looking, like he didn't want to see what was in there again. "That's him," he said, voice flat as paper. A man was lying face down on an old braided rug, one arm stretched out toward the coffee table, the other twisted under his body in a way that made my training kick in immediately. He was wearing work clothes, the kind you see on every farmer around here. Faded denim and a plaid shirt that had seen better days. Work boots still laced tight. I dropped down beside him, pulling on gloves from my kit, already running through the checklist in my head while I reached for his neck to find a pulse. His skin was cool, but not cold. That in-between temperature that could mean he'd been down 20 minutes or 2 hours. The boy stayed in the doorway, watching me work with eyes that didn't blink nearly enough, and I noticed his breathing was perfectly regular, like he was counting the seconds between each breath. I was turning the man's head to check his airway when his hand shot up and grabbed my wrist, grip stronger than anyone in his condition should have been capable of. His eyes opened wide, pupils blown huge and unfocused, and his mouth moved like he was trying to scream, but only this thin wheeze came out. Then words, barely audible, pushed through cracked lips. "Don't trust him." His fingers dug into my skin hard enough to leave marks, and his eyes rolled toward the doorway where the boy stood, then back to mine with desperate urgency. "He's not my son," he whispered, each word seeming to cost him enormous effort, spit bubbling at the corners of his mouth. Before I could react or even process what was happening, the boy's voice changed completely, dropping maybe 2 octaves and taking on this mechanical quality, like a recording being played through a broken speaker. He was repeating the exact words from the 911 call, every inflection identical to what dispatch had relayed to me. "My dad's not moving. Please send someone. He's in the living room and he won't wake up. Please hurry." It came out of his mouth, but it wasn't him speaking, if that makes any sense, like something else was using his voice box as an instrument. The man's grip on my wrist went slack, and his eyes rolled back, body going limp like someone had pulled his plug. When I looked back at the doorway, the boy was gone, just empty space where he'd been standing a second before, but I could hear footsteps directly above us, slow and deliberate, moving across the ceiling from one side of the room to the other. My radio crackled to life on my shoulder, static cutting through the silence, and then came a voice that shouldn't have been possible. It was the boy again, using that same frightened child tone from the 911 call, coming through the medical channel that only our units could access. Is someone coming? My dad needs help, please. Is someone coming to help my dad? I grabbed the radio to respond, but my throat felt like it had closed up completely, and then the transmission changed to my own voice, the exact words I'd said when arriving. Unit 7 on scene, proceeding to patient. The footsteps upstairs stopped right above where I was kneeling, and through the thin ceiling I could hear breathing, wet and labored, like lungs full of fluid trying to work. The man on the floor started moving again, not normal movement, but these jerky spasms that made his limbs bend at angles that looked painful. His head turned toward me even though his eyes stayed closed, and when his mouth opened, it was the boy's voice that came out, high and innocent. Found your dad yet? Then it switched to what sounded like an elderly woman, maybe someone who'd called 911 before. He's not breathing, oh God, please help him. Then another voice, a man this time, panicked and desperate. There's so much blood, I don't know what to do. All these voices pouring out of this unconscious man's mouth while his body convulsed on the floor. And I realized with absolute clarity that whatever was in this house had been collecting emergency calls, learning how to bring people here, using their desperation as bait. I backed away from the body and ran for the door, medical training be damned, because every instinct I had was screaming that this was beyond anything I could handle. The front door slammed shut just as I reached it, the deadbolt turning by itself with a click that sounded final. Behind me, I heard the boy laughing, except it was my laugh, recorded from some moment I couldn't remember, playing back through whatever was pretending to be a child. The light started flickering, casting these weird shadows that moved independent of anything in the room, and my radio kept cycling through different voices, all of them mine from various calls over the years, creating this horrible chorus of my own words twisted into something threatening. I grabbed a chair and smashed it through the front window, not caring about the glass cutting my arms as I climbed through, just needing to get out of that house before whatever was mimicking us decided to do more than just play recordings. The moment I hit the ground outside, everything went quiet, like someone had muted the world. I looked back and the house was dark, completely dark. No yellow glow, no movement, nothing. My ambulance was right where I'd left it, keys still in the ignition, and I drove away without looking back, calling dispatch to report that the patient was DOA and law enforcement was needed. When the sheriff's department arrived 2 hours later, they found the house empty. Not just of people, but of furniture too, like no one had lived there in years. The only thing they discovered was an old answering machine in the basement, the kind from the 80s, playing a continuous loop of emergency calls from all over the county, some dating back decades. They destroyed it, and the calls to that address stopped, but sometimes when I'm working a night shift and get a call to a remote location, I hear something in the caller's voice, a slight mechanical quality, a too perfect repetition of phrases that makes me wonder if whatever was in that house didn't die with the answering machine, but just found a new way to fish for the people who come running when someone calls for help. Nobody prepares you for the weight of calling it. When you graduate from EMT school in 2015 and start working the streets, they teach you the protocols, the signs, the procedures. But they never tell you about the moment your voice has to make it real. When you say those words out loud and a person officially stops being a person and becomes a body. I did my first year on the day shift with the county ambulance service in Rochester, mostly handling nursing home transfers and minor injuries. By the time I turned 26, I had moved to nights, working the graveyard rotation when the truly bad calls came in. The cardiac arrests, the overdoses, the DOAs. That shift where everything happens in shadows and fluorescent hospital lights, where you see people at their absolute worst. I had a decent partner back then, this older guy named Vincent, who had 20 years under his belt and never got rattled. He taught me how to compartmentalize, how to do the job without taking it home, how to call it when someone was gone and move on to the next call. The thing is, I was good at my job, Real good. I could run a code like clockwork, start IVs on rolling veins that other medics would miss, intubate in the back of a moving rig on rough roads. My call accuracy was near perfect. When I said someone was gone, they were gone. No second guessing, no wasted effort on people who were already beyond help. The supervisors loved that about me. Efficient, professional. I never froze up, never hesitated. I just did what needed to be done. We worked out of Station 23 on the east side, running 12-hour shifts from 7 at night until 7 in the morning. Our rig was Unit 47, an older Ford chassis with about 90,000 miles on it, but it ran smooth and had all the equipment we needed. I probably spent more time in that ambulance than I did in my own apartment. Knew every rattle, every squeaky cabinet where the backup oxygen masks were stored, which drawer stuck when you tried to open it too fast. It became like a second home, that cramped space in the back with the gurney and monitors and drug boxes. Just me, my partner, and whatever poor soul we were transporting. The first time something felt weird was on a Wednesday in late November of 2017. We got called out to a retirement community for an unresponsive elderly male, possible cardiac arrest. Standard stuff. When we arrived, the patient was clearly gone, had been for at least 15 or 20 minutes based on the lividity and body temperature. His daughter was there, hysterical, begging us to do something even though she knew it was too late. We went through the motions anyway because that is what you do. Started compressions, got the monitor on him, ran a strip. Asystole, flatline, no shockable rhythm. I checked for a pulse at the carotid, then the femoral. Nothing. No respirations, fixed and dilated pupils. All the signs. I made the call right there in the living room, noted the time, and we prepared to turn the scene over to the funeral home. But when we loaded him onto our gurney to wheel him out, Vincent noticed something. The guy's chest was still moving, just barely, these tiny, shallow movements like he was taking the smallest breaths possible. I checked again. No pulse, no heart sounds. But yeah, his chest was definitely rising and falling, maybe 3 or 4 times a minute. Vincent looked at me like I had screwed up the assessment, but I knew what I had checked. That man had been dead. We transported him to the hospital anyway because what else were we supposed to do? And I reported it to the ER doc as a possible agonal breathing, even though it did not fit the pattern. Agonal respirations happen right when someone is dying, not 20 minutes after. The doctor examined him, confirmed no cardiac activity, and declared him dead again at the hospital. The whole thing got written up as an unusual case, maybe some kind of residual nerve activity or diaphragm spasm. Weird, but not unheard of. I did not think much more about it after that. Medicine is full of strange anomalies, bodies doing things that do not make sense. You learn to accept that not everything has a clean explanation. A week later, it happened again. Different patient, different location, elderly woman found unresponsive in her bed at a nursing facility. Same situation, clearly deceased when we arrived, all the signs present. I called it at the scene. Then, during transport to the hospital, she started that same shallow breathing pattern. Chest rising and falling in these almost imperceptible movements, like something was mechanically forcing air in and out. No pulse, no heartbeat, but breathing. The nurse at the hospital gave me a hard time about my assessment, suggested maybe I needed a refresher course on determining death. That stung, because I knew I had done everything right. When it happened a third time the following month, I started keeping track. Same pattern. Elderly patient, clearly deceased, I make the pronouncement. Then during transport they exhibit that bizarre shallow breathing for anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes before it finally stops. Always in Unit 47. Always on my shifts. I started wondering if maybe there was something wrong with our equipment, like maybe the ventilator was somehow triggering residual muscle contractions, or the monitor was picking up false readings that made me think they were dead when they were not. But I checked everything. The equipment was functioning perfectly, and besides, I was not relying on machines. I was doing manual assessments, checking for pulses with my own fingers, listening for heart sounds with my stethoscope, watching for chest rise without any equipment attached. These people were dead. Clinically, legally, medically dead. Yet their bodies kept trying to breathe after I called it. By January, it had happened 6 times. All different patients, different circumstances, but the same unsettling result. I started having trouble sleeping. Not because I was scared exactly, but because I could not figure out what I was doing wrong. Was I calling it too early? Was I missing something in my assessment? But then I would review each case in my head and know, absolutely know, that I had done everything by the book. Vincent retired in February and I got partnered with this younger woman named Allison, who had just finished her paramedic certification. She was eager, asked a lot of questions, wanted to learn everything. I did not mention the breathing thing to her because I did not want to freak her out or make her question my competence. But then one night in early March, we got a call for a male in his 70s, possible stroke. We arrived to find him in his recliner. Unresponsive, no pulse, no respirations. Obvious signs of death, probably been gone for an hour or more based on the rigor starting to set in. I went through my assessment, checked everything twice because Allison was watching, learning. I pronounced him deceased, documented the time as 2:47 in the morning. We loaded him up for transport to the medical examiner. Halfway to the hospital, Allison was in the back doing the paperwork when she suddenly called up to me in the driver's seat. Her voice had this edge to it, confused and a little panicked. She said the patient was breathing. I pulled over immediately, climbed in the back. Sure enough, that same shallow rise and fall of the chest. Allison had her hand on his wrist, searching for a pulse she was not going to find. She looked at me with these wide eyes and asked what was happening. I did not have an answer for her. That incident shook me worse than all the others because now I had a witness. It was not just me seeing things or making assessment errors. Allison had seen it too. We reported it to our supervisor when we got back to the station, and he said he would look into it, but I could tell he thought we were either mistaken or exaggerating. A few days later, he told me the company wanted me to undergo a medical evaluation and possibly take some time off. They were worried about fatigue, burnout, that I was making dangerous judgment calls. I got defensive, told him my assessments were solid, that something genuinely strange was happening with our patients. He just nodded and said that is exactly why they wanted me evaluated. The implication was clear. They thought the problem was me, not the patients. I agreed to see the occupational health doctor, passed all the tests, got cleared for duty. But the seed of doubt had been planted in my mind. What if I was doing something? What if somehow, unconsciously, I was causing this? The thought was insane, but I could not shake it. I started second-guessing every call, every assessment, checking and rechecking vital signs until Allison would gently tell me I had already checked 3 times and we needed to move. Then I remembered the cameras. Every ambulance in our fleet had an onboard camera system installed about 2 years earlier, mounted in the patient compartment. It was supposed to be for liability protection and quality assurance, recording everything that happened during transport. The footage was stored on a hard drive at the station, usually only reviewed if there was an incident or complaint. I had never thought to check it before because why would I? But now I needed to know. I needed to see what was actually happening in the back of that ambulance. On my next day off, I went to the station when I knew the supervisor would not be there and accessed the video archive. I pulled up the files from Unit 47, going back to that first case in November. The system let you search by date and unit number, and I found the timestamp for when we had transported that first elderly man. I watched the footage on the small monitor in the supervisor's office, my heart pounding harder than it should have been. The video showed exactly what I remembered. Patient on the gurney, clearly deceased, Vincent doing paperwork while I did my final check. Everything looked normal, routine, professional. Then I saw myself lean down close to the patient's face, checking for breathing. That is when I saw it. My lips were moving. I was saying something, whispering directly over the patient's mouth and nose as I checked for breathing. The camera did not have audio, so I could not hear what I was saying, but I could clearly see my mouth forming words. 2 words, repeated twice. I watched it again, and again. I tried to read my own lips on that grainy footage. It looked like I was saying, "Keep breathing," but that did not make any sense. Why would I say that? I did not remember saying anything. I pulled up the second case, the elderly woman from the nursing facility. Same thing. As I leaned in to check for respirations, my lips moved in that same pattern. 2 words, whispered right into her airway. I checked the third case, the fourth, the fifth, every single one. Every time I pronounced someone dead, I was whispering something to them first. Something I had absolutely no memory of doing. My hands started trembling as I sat there in that dark office, watching myself on camera doing something I could not recall. Something that seemed to correlate directly with these people continuing to breathe after death. I thought maybe I was having some kind of fugue state, some psychological break where I was doing things without conscious awareness. But I felt fine. I felt normal. There was no missing time, no confusion, nothing except this one specific action that I apparently performed over and over without knowing it. I checked the most recent case, the one with Allison present. The footage showed both of us in the back of the ambulance. I watched myself do the assessment, pronounce the patient deceased, and then as I did my final check for breathing, leaning down close, there it was again. My lips moving in that same whispered pattern. Allison had been right there, less than 3 feet away, filling out paperwork on the clipboard. She had not noticed me saying anything. After I straightened up, the timestamp showed about 6 minutes passing where nothing happened. Then the patient's chest started that shallow rising and falling. Allison noticed it, called out, and I climbed back to check. On camera, you could see the confusion on both our faces, the way we kept checking for vital signs that were not there. The breathing continued for another 8 minutes before finally stopping completely. I sat back in that chair and tried to process what I had just seen. There was no rational explanation for this. I was somehow causing dead people to keep breathing by whispering words I did not remember saying. Words that, according to the lip reading I could make out, were literally telling them to keep breathing. The worst part was not even the impossibility of it. The worst part was that I had no idea how long I had been doing this. I had been a paramedic for years before these cases started getting noticed. How many other patients had I done this to without anyone realizing it? I copied the relevant footage onto a flash drive, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the keyboard. I knew I had to report this, had to show someone, but who would believe me? More importantly, what would happen if they did believe me? Would I be fired, arrested, committed? I had no explanation for what I was doing or why. That night, I could not bring myself to go home. I drove around the city for hours, replaying everything in my mind, trying to remember even a single instance of whispering those words. Nothing. It was like watching a stranger who happened to look exactly like me. When my shift started at 7, I showed up early and requested an immediate meeting with the operations manager and the medical director. I brought the flash drive and played them the footage without any explanation first. They watched in silence as I showed them case after case of me, whispering to deceased patients. The medical director asked me what I was saying in the videos. I told him the truth, that I did not know, that I had no memory of speaking at all, but that it appeared to be the words, "Keep breathing." Then I showed them the aftermath footage, the patients exhibiting respiratory activity well after being pronounced dead. The room went quiet for a long time. Finally, the operations manager asked if I had been taking any medications, if I had any history of sleepwalking or dissociative episodes. I said no to everything. The medical director wanted to know if this was some kind of joke or prank. I told him I wished it was. They placed me on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation. I was not allowed to work any shifts, was not allowed in any company vehicles, had to surrender my credentials and access badge. They said it was for my own safety and the safety of patients, standard procedure for something this unusual. I understood. but it felt like my entire identity was being stripped away. Being a paramedic was not just what I did. It was who I was. Walking out of that station knowing I might never come back destroyed something in me. For the next 3 weeks, I heard nothing. No calls, no emails, no updates on the investigation. I spent most of that time in my apartment, barely eating, barely sleeping, just trying to understand what had happened to me. I started researching online, looking for similar cases, anything that might explain unconscious vocalization or psychological conditions that could cause someone to speak without awareness. I found nothing that fit. Then one morning, I got a call from the medical director asking me to come back to the station for a meeting. When I arrived, there were 2 people I did not recognize sitting in the conference room with him. They introduced themselves as neurologists from the university hospital. They had reviewed all my footage, my medical records, and the patient outcome data. One of them explained that they believed I had developed a rare form of automatism, an unconscious motor behavior triggered specifically by the stress and routine of pronouncing death. Essentially, my brain had created an involuntary ritual, a coping mechanism for the psychological weight of making that final call. The words I was saying, "keep breathing," were likely a subconscious manifestation of anxiety about making the wrong determination, a safety check my mind performed without my conscious participation. As for why the patients actually kept breathing afterward, they had a different theory. They believed it was never really happening at all, not the way I thought. They explained that confirmation bias and hypervigilance had made me hypersensitive to any tiny movement or artifact that could be mistaken for breathing. The slight settling of tissues, residual air escaping the lungs, even vibrations from the moving ambulance could create the illusion of chest rise. Because I was unconsciously anxious about my pronouncements, I was seeing breathing where there was none, and that perception was being reinforced by my ritualistic whispering. Allison, seeing it too, was explained as the power of suggestion, me directing her attention to movements that she then interpreted as I did. It sounded reasonable when they explained it. Clinical, scientific. But sitting there listening to them, I could not shake the feeling that they were wrong. I had felt those chests rising and falling under my hands. I had counted the shallow breaths, timed them. It was not imagination or artifact. Something had been happening in the back of Unit 47, something that defied their neat explanations. But I did not argue. What would be the point? They cleared me to return to work with the recommendation that I undergo cognitive behavioral therapy and take a 6-month rotation off the night shift to reduce stress. I accepted their terms, grateful to have my job back even though nothing felt resolved. Here is the strange part, the part that still keeps me up at night. After that meeting, after everything came to light and I became consciously aware of the whispering, it stopped. Completely. I have been back on the job for almost a year now, and I have pronounced dozens of people deceased in that time. I have checked the camera footage after every single call. My lips never move anymore. I never whisper anything. And the patients, they stay dead. No mysterious breathing, no impossible continued respiratory activity. Whatever was happening, knowing about it made it stop. The neurologist said that was proof of their theory, that conscious awareness disrupted the automatism. Maybe they are right. Maybe it was all in my head, some elaborate psychological glitch that manifested in a way that seemed supernatural, but was really just my brain misfiring under stress. Or maybe something else was going on, something I was doing without knowing it, and the moment I became aware, whatever door I had accidentally opened got closed. I still work out of Station 23. They reassigned Unit 47 to another crew, gave me a newer ambulance. I pass my old rig in the bay sometimes and wonder if it was the vehicle or if it was me. I wonder if those patients would have stayed dead if I had never whispered those words, or if somehow, in some way I will never understand, I was keeping them tethered to something they should have been released from. I do not have answers. All I know is that for those few months, I had the power to make dead people breathe, and I did not even know I was doing it. That terrifies me more than any call I have ever run, more than any trauma or death I have witnessed. Because if I could do that without knowing, what else am I capable of? What else might I be doing right now that I am completely unaware of? I check the camera footage obsessively now, watching myself work, searching for any sign of something I might be missing. So far, there is nothing. But I keep looking anyway because I learned the hard way that the scariest things are not the ones you can see coming. They are the ones you have been doing all along without ever realizing it. Anyone who tells you they've seen the worst humanity has to offer has probably never worked EMS in a major city. I'm Jenna. Been riding ambulances in Philadelphia for 6 years now since graduating the academy right after my 24th birthday. The job changes you in ways you can't explain to people who've never done it. You learn to compartmentalize, to separate the person screaming in front of you from the person you go home to at night. Most days I was good at that. Most days I could clock out, drive my beat-up Jeep Cherokee back to my apartment in Fishtown, and leave the sirens behind. But after the highway pileup in late November 2022, something in that system broke. 15 vehicles, thick fog rolling off the Delaware, and by the time we arrived it looked like a war zone, metal twisted into shapes that shouldn't exist, and the sounds coming from inside those cars still wake me up sometimes. We lost 9 people that night despite everything we tried. The last one was a college kid named Troy, maybe 19, trapped in the backseat of his friend's sedan with the roof caved in around him. He kept asking if his girlfriend was okay, kept repeating her name even as we worked to extract him. "Tell Amy I love her, please, just tell Amy." Those were his last words before his vitals crashed and we lost him on the way to Temple University Hospital. The first time I heard his voice again, I thought I was losing my mind. It was 3 weeks after the pileup, middle of a Wednesday afternoon shift. We were responding to a domestic disturbance call on Spring Garden Street, nothing unusual, and as my partner Corey drove, I was checking our supplies in the back. That's when I heard it, clear as if someone was sitting right next to me. "Tell Amy I love her, please, just tell Amy." Same desperate tone, same crack in his voice on the word please. I spun around so fast I nearly knocked over the med kit, but there was nobody there. Just me and the rattling equipment and the wail of our siren cutting through traffic. Corey noticed me acting weird, asked if I was okay, and I lied and said I was fine. What was I supposed to tell him? That I was hearing dead people? I convinced myself it was stress, maybe PTSD finally catching up with me. The department had offered counseling after the pileup, but I'd waved it off like an idiot, thinking I was tougher than that. By the time we finished the domestic call and headed back to the station, I'd almost talked myself into believing it was just my brain misfiring, a random auditory hallucination brought on by exhaustion and too much coffee. But then it happened again, and again. Over the next 2 weeks I heard Troy's voice 4 more times, always during calls, always the same exact phrase. Then I started hearing others from that night. A woman named Diane who'd been in the minivan whispering, "My babies are in the back," over and over. An older man whose last words were just "Martha, Martha" in this broken, confused way that made my chest hurt. It was always crystal clear, never muffled or distant, and it only happened when I was working. Never at home, never during my days off, only in the ambulance or at accident scenes. I started keeping a small notebook in my pocket, writing down every time it happened, trying to find a pattern. December 13th, heard Diane during a cardiac arrest call in Kensington. December 16th, heard the older man while transporting an overdose patient. December 20th, heard Troy again on our way to a construction accident. There was no logic to it, no connection between the current calls and what I was hearing. My partner Corey definitely noticed something was wrong by then. He'd catch me staring at nothing, or flinching at sounds he couldn't hear. I started making excuses, saying I wasn't sleeping well, which wasn't exactly a lie. Then came the night of January 4th. We were parked outside a Wawa on Aramingo Avenue, grabbing coffee during a rare quiet moment around 11 in the evening. Corey was inside and I was sitting in the driver's seat with the engine running, scrolling through my phone and trying not to think about the voices. That's when I heard something completely different. A man's voice, panicked and rapid, speaking what I thought might be Spanish at first, but the rhythm was wrong. It wasn't Spanish. The words tumbled over each other in desperation, and I couldn't understand a single one, but the terror in his tone was unmistakable. Ajutatsima varogchineva, ajutatsima. Over and over, getting more frantic. I sat there with my coffee cup halfway to my mouth, every muscle in my body going rigid. This wasn't Troy or Diane or any of the others from the pileup. This was someone new, and unlike the previous voices that felt like echoes of the past, this one felt immediate, present, like it was happening right now. I checked my watch without really knowing why. 11:14 in the evening. The voice kept going for maybe 20 seconds, then cut off abruptly mid-word, and the silence that followed felt heavy and wrong. Corey came back to the ambulance maybe 30 seconds later, holding 2 coffees and complaining about the line inside. I must have been staring straight ahead because he asked me again if I was all right, and I opened my mouth to tell him what I just heard when our radio crackled to life. Dispatch calling all available units to a vehicle accident on Castor Avenue, approximately 2 miles from our location. Single car wrapped around a utility pole, possible fatality. The timestamp on the call was 11:15, 1 minute after I'd checked my watch. 1 minute after that voice had cut off. My hands went cold gripping the steering wheel, and Corey was already radioing back our response, asking me why I wasn't moving yet. I snapped out of it and hit the lights, pulling out of the parking lot faster than I should have. The whole drive there, my mind was racing, trying to tell myself it was coincidence, that there was no possible way those things were connected. We arrived at the scene to find a gray Toyota Camry, accordioned around a wooden pole, the front end completely destroyed. Fire department was already there working to extract the driver. When we finally got him out and onto our stretcher, he was already gone. Mid-40s, construction vest still on, and according to his wallet, his name was Adrian Popescu. The police officer helping us said he'd been heading home from a late shift when he apparently swerved to avoid something in the road and lost control. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. I sat at my kitchen table until sunrise with my laptop open, searching variations of the phrases I'd heard. It took me almost an hour, but I finally found it. Romanian. Ajutați-mă, vă rog cineva, ajutați-mă, meant, help me, please, someone, help me. Adrian Popescu was a Romanian name. I must have read that translation 50 times, feeling sicker with each repetition. The voices from the pileup, I could rationalize those as trauma, my brain replaying memories in warped ways. But this was different. I had never met Adrian Popescu, never responded to any calls involving him before that night. And I had heard his voice, heard his final desperate plea, at the exact moment he was dying 2 miles away. Part of me wanted to convince myself I'd somehow heard a preliminary dispatch or a conversation on another channel, anything logical. But I knew our radio traffic. I knew what I'd heard and when I'd heard it. The next shift I worked, I was jumpy the entire time, dreading hearing another unknown voice. Every call felt like waiting for something terrible to happen. Corey kept asking what was wrong, and I kept deflecting, making up excuses about personal problems or bad sleep. How do you tell someone that you think you're hearing people die in real time? That you might be some kind of unwilling witness to deaths as they happen across the city? It happened again 5 days later. Friday evening, we were restocking supplies at the station when I heard a teenage girl's voice, high and terrified, screaming, "Dad, watch out, Dad!" Just those words, repeated 3 times, then nothing. I checked the time immediately, 7:32, told Corey I needed air and went outside, pacing by the ambulance bay with my phone in my hand, waiting. The call came through at 7:35. Multi-vehicle accident on Interstate 95 southbound. Multiple injuries reported. We responded along with 2 other units, and when we got there, it was chaos. A pickup truck had rear-ended a sedan at high speed, pushing it into the concrete barrier. The driver of the sedan was dead at the scene. His daughter, 16 years old, was in the passenger seat with severe injuries but alive. She was hysterical, kept saying she'd told him to watch out, that she'd seen the truck coming. I worked on her in the back of the ambulance while Corey drove, and the whole time I felt like I might throw up. This girl was crying next to me, alive, traumatized, and I had heard her voice 3 minutes before impact. Not after. Before. Or during. At the exact moment her father was dying and she was screaming for him to react. I saved her life that night. Or at least I kept her stable until we reached the hospital, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been some kind of ghost listener to her worst moment. That's when I made the mistake of going to the police. I thought maybe if I could help, if I could use this horrible thing to prevent accidents or at least get emergency services there faster, then maybe it would mean something. I went to the 5th District Station on Sunday, my day off, and asked to speak with someone about the recent accidents. They connected me with a detective named Wallace, this tired-looking guy maybe in his 50s with gray at his temples. I tried to explain without sounding completely insane. Told him I was a paramedic who'd been experiencing something strange, that I'd been hearing things before accidents happened, that I might be able to help identify patterns. He listened patiently, took notes, asked me specific questions about times and locations. I gave him everything I had: the Adrian Popescu case, the father and daughter on Interstate 95. Even mentioned the pileup from November, though I framed it as the origin of some kind of intuition I'd developed. Wallace seemed genuinely interested, said he'd look into it and asked me to call him if it happened again. I left feeling like maybe I'd done the right thing, like maybe this curse or gift or whatever it was could serve some purpose. That optimism lasted exactly 4 days. Wallace called me on Thursday afternoon while I was off duty, asked if I could come back to the station. His tone was different, more formal, and when I arrived there was another detective with him, a woman named Ortiz who introduced herself from Internal Affairs. They sat me down in an interview room, and that's when everything shifted. Wallace started asking pointed questions about how I knew details about accidents before they were publicly reported, whether I had police scanner access beyond standard EMS channels, whether I had any connection to the victims or their families. Ortiz asked about my work schedule, whether I'd been experiencing any mental health issues, whether I was taking any medications. It dawned on me halfway through that they didn't think I was psychic or helpful. They thought I was involved, maybe causing accidents or at minimum had some insider knowledge about them. I tried to explain again, tried to make them understand, but the more I talked, the worse it sounded. A paramedic who somehow knows about fatal accidents minutes before they're reported? Who can describe victims' final words? It sounded like either a confession or a delusion, and neither option was good. They let me go after 2 hours but told me not to leave the city, that they'd be in touch. I drove home shaking, not from fear of being arrested because I knew they had nothing concrete, but from the realization that I was completely alone in this. The voices continued. I heard an elderly woman praying in what might have been Mandarin, and 12 minutes later we responded to a house fire, where a woman in her 70s died of smoke inhalation. I heard a young man saying, "I'm sorry, Mom, I'm so sorry," and 7 minutes later there was a motorcycle accident on Broad Street. Each time I heard someone new, I'd check my watch, write down the time, and wait for the inevitable call. I stopped reporting anything to Wallace or the police, stopped talking about it at all. Corey eventually stopped asking what was wrong with me, and I could tell he'd started requesting shifts with other partners when possible. I didn't blame him. I was becoming unreliable, distant, jumping at sounds nobody else could hear. The department made me see their counselor after I had what they called a panic attack during a routine transfer, though it was really just me hearing a man's voice begging in broken English while we were transporting a stable patient to a nursing home. The counselor diagnosed me with PTSD and recommended a leave of absence. I refused. If I wasn't working, if I wasn't in the ambulance, would I still hear them? Would they die and I wouldn't know? The thought of that felt worse somehow, like I was the only witness to these final moments and abandoning my post would make their deaths even more meaningless. The breaking point came on a Wednesday night in late March. We were finishing up a shift, heading back to the station around midnight, when I heard multiple voices at once. Not one person, but several, overlapping and frantic. A woman shouting something about her baby, a man yelling coordinates or an address I couldn't quite make out, a child crying, all of it happening simultaneously in my head, this horrible chorus of panic that made me pull the ambulance over on the side of Lehigh Avenue because I couldn't see straight. Corey was yelling at me, asking what was happening, and I couldn't answer because the voices were so loud, so immediate. Then they stopped. All at once. Complete silence. I checked my watch with trembling fingers. 12:07 in the morning. We sat there for maybe 90 seconds before the radio exploded with traffic. Major structure fire on Allegheny Avenue. Multiple victims reported. All units respond. We were among the first to arrive. An apartment building, 4 stories, fully engulfed. Fire department was pulling people out and we were triaging on the street, and it was exactly like the pileup all over again except worse, because some of these people were children. We worked through the night. 5 people died in that fire, including a 6-month-old baby and her mother who'd been trapped on the 3rd floor. I went home that morning, didn't bother trying to sleep, and made a decision. I couldn't keep doing this. Not the job, not the voices, not any of it. I called the department administrator and told them I was taking that leave of absence after all, effective immediately. They didn't argue. I think everyone had been waiting for me to break. The first week off was the hardest because I kept expecting to hear something, kept waiting for that terrible intrusion of someone's dying words. But there was nothing. Silence. Complete, ordinary silence. I went grocery shopping, cleaned my apartment, took walks around the neighborhood and heard nothing but normal city sounds. Car horns, conversations, dogs barking. No voices. No final pleas in languages I didn't understand. It was like whatever connection had formed that night during the pileup, whatever circuit had been burned into my brain, only worked when I was actively in that role. When I was a paramedic responding to emergencies. Away from the ambulance, away from the sirens and the radio traffic, I was just a regular person again. The relief was so intense it made me cry, just sitting on my couch on a Friday afternoon, crying because I could exist without being a conduit for other people's deaths. I never went back to EMS. I know that probably sounds like I gave up or ran away, and maybe I did. But I couldn't step back into that ambulance knowing what might start again. The department processed my resignation in May, and I found work doing medical billing from home, something quiet and removed from emergency medicine. Detective Wallace called me once more in June, said they'd closed their inquiry into me, that there wasn't enough evidence of anything except maybe some lucky guesses and stress-related incidents. He didn't apologize, but his tone suggested he felt bad about how it had all gone down. I thanked him and hung up and never heard from him again. Some nights I still think about all those voices, wonder if I really heard them, or if my mind just convinced itself of an impossible pattern during the worst period of my life. The timing was too precise to be coincidence, but the alternative is accepting something I don't have words for. What I do know is this: I haven't heard a single voice since I left that job, and I check the Philadelphia accident reports compulsively every morning to make sure. People are still dying in this city every day in terrible ways, but I'm not connected to it anymore. Whatever that connection was, whether it was trauma or something else entirely, it needed me to be in that role to exist. I'm just Jenna now, not Paramedic Castellano from Unit 12. And the silence, the beautiful ordinary silence, is something I'll never take for granted again. County Ambulance Service hired me right after I finished my paramedic certification in 2012, and by the time this whole thing started, I'd seen enough mangled metal and broken bodies to know when something didn't add up. Route 34 outside of Bakersfield had always been one of our problem areas, the kind of rural stretch where people drove too fast and paid too little attention. But there was this specific section between mile marker 18 and the old grain elevator that seemed to collect accidents like a magnet. My partner, Ethan Briggs, who'd been running calls since before I was even thinking about this career, had this habit of going completely silent whenever dispatch sent us out there. He'd just grip the wheel a little tighter and stare straight ahead, and after enough shifts together, I learned not to ask why. The calls always came in during those dead hours between 2 and 4 in the morning. Always single vehicle collisions. Always loss of control on a perfectly straight section of road. The first time the pattern really registered in my brain was a Tuesday in March of 2018. Dispatch crackled through at 2:47 in the morning with the usual information. Single vehicle accident. Possible fatalities. Route 34 near mile marker 18. Ethan and I rolled out with lights blazing, cutting through the empty darkness of farmland on both sides. When we got there, a silver Dodge pickup was wrapped around a telephone pole like someone had folded it in half, driver's side completely destroyed. The guy inside was already dead. No amount of intervention was going to change that. A state trooper was on scene, young guy who looked like he might throw up any second, and he kept repeating that the driver must have been doing 70 or 80 to hit that hard. But the road was straight as an arrow at that point. No curves, no potholes, no deer or debris, nothing. The skid marks told the story though. The driver had suddenly jerked the wheel hard to the right, like he was swerving to avoid something directly in front of him. Except there was nothing there to avoid. 2 months later, it happened again. Same stretch of road, same time of night, 3:12 in the morning on a Friday in May. A red Toyota Camry this time, rolled 3 times according to the debris field, came to rest upside down in the drainage ditch. Young woman, maybe early 20s, still breathing when we got there, but barely. We worked her for 20 minutes on scene before loading her up and hauling toward the hospital, but she didn't make it. Ethan was the one who pointed it out to me as we were cleaning the rig afterward, his voice low and careful, like he was testing how I'd react. He said the Camry had gone off the road within maybe 30 feet of where the pickup hit back in March. Same side of the road, same sudden veer to the right, same inexplicable loss of control on a straight section with perfect visibility. I told him it was probably just a bad spot in the pavement, maybe an optical illusion with the road lights. Something logical. But even as I said it, I didn't really believe it. And from the way Ethan just nodded and didn't argue, I could tell he didn't believe it either. The third accident sealed it for me. July 2018, a Wednesday night that was actually early Thursday morning, 2:33 when the call came through. By the time we pulled up with our light bar painting everything in red and white, I already had this sick feeling in my gut. White Ford Explorer, single vehicle, driver and passenger both dead on impact. The vehicle had veered right and hit the same telephone pole that the pickup had destroyed back in March. They'd replaced the pole, but you could still see the scarring on the ground where the old one had been. This time, though, I started looking around while the state police did their investigation. And that's when I noticed it, maybe 20 yards up the road on the right shoulder. A small white cross, the kind families put up as roadside memorials. It was half sunk into the mud and weeds, old enough that the paint was peeling and the plastic flowers zip-tied to it had faded to almost nothing. I walked over to get a closer look while Ethan was dealing with the bodies. The name on it was weathered but still readable. In memory of Claire Hutchins, 1989-2013. I did the math in my head. Whoever Claire was, she'd died 5 years before our first call to this spot, and she'd been only 24 years old. I didn't mention the cross to Ethan right away because part of me felt stupid for even thinking it mattered. Memorials are everywhere on rural roads, marking every tragedy that's happened over the years, and it didn't necessarily mean anything that one was near our accident cluster. But I couldn't stop thinking about it during my days off. I ended up going to the county library and digging through their newspaper archives on the microfiche machine, feeling like some conspiracy theorist hunting for patterns that didn't exist. It took me about 2 hours of scrolling through 2013 editions before I found the article. Local woman dies in single vehicle accident on Route 34. Claire Hutchins had been driving home from her shift at a packaging plant lost control of her vehicle at approximately 2:50 in the morning and struck a utility pole. The article was brief, maybe 3 paragraphs, the kind of tragic story that gets buried on page 6 and forgotten within a week. But what made my chest tighten was the detail about the investigating officer noting that there were no skid marks, no evidence of braking, just a sudden veer off the roadway for no apparent reason. The exact same thing we were seeing now. After that, I started keeping a notebook in my gear bag. Every time we got called to Route 34, I'd write down the exact coordinates from our GPS unit, the time of the call, the weather conditions, the make and model of the vehicle, everything I could think of. Ethan noticed me doing it after the 4th accident in September, a blue Chevy Tahoe with a family of 3 inside. Only the youngest kid survived, 5-year-old boy who kept asking for his mom while we worked on him in the back of the ambulance. Ethan didn't ask what I was documenting. He just gave me this look that said he already knew and he approved. When I showed him my notes a week later during a slow shift, we spread everything out on the break room table and just stared at it. 4 accidents in 6 months, all between mile marker 18 and 18.2, all between 2:30 and 3:15 in the morning, all single vehicles veering right for no reason. The coordinates I'd been logging showed that every single impact point was within a 100-foot radius, and every single one pointed directly toward where that memorial cross stood. The thing that really started eating at me was our dash cam footage. Every ambulance in our fleet had them installed after some lawsuit a few years back, forward-facing cameras that recorded whenever we were responding to a call. I'd never paid much attention to them before, but one night in late September, I was in the station office filing paperwork when I got the idea to review our response videos. Our supervisor kept all the footage backed up on an external hard drive in case we ever needed it for legal purposes, so I waited until he left for the night and pulled up the files. I started with the March accident, the silver pickup, and watched our approach to the scene. The timestamp showed 2:53 in the morning, our headlights cutting through complete darkness, and then at exactly 2:53:14, maybe 10 seconds before we reached the accident site, there was this brief flash of light on the right side of the road. Just a quick strobe effect, like emergency lights from another vehicle, except there was no other vehicle. We were the first ones there. The state trooper didn't arrive until after us. I backed up the video and watched it 3 more times. Same flash, same location, right where the memorial cross would be if the camera angle went that far to the right. I checked the May footage next, the rolled Camry with the young woman who died. Same thing. At 3:16:22 in the morning, as we approached the scene, there was a flash of light on the right shoulder, brief and rhythmic like a light bar cycling through its pattern. Then I checked July, the Ford Explorer with the 2 fatalities. Flash at 2:37:09, same spot on the road. September, the Tahoe with the family. Flash at 2:48:51. Every single response, every single approach, there were lights flashing on that stretch of road seconds before we arrived at the crash site. But there was never another emergency vehicle ahead of us. I sat there in that office with my heart hammering in my chest, trying to come up with rational explanations. Maybe it was a reflection off something metallic. Maybe it was a glitch in the camera system. Maybe it was light bouncing off the telephone wires in a weird way. But I'd been doing this job long enough to know what emergency lights looked like. And that's exactly what I was seeing on that footage. Someone else's lights flashing in that exact spot, as if they'd already responded to an accident that we were still en route to. I showed Ethan the footage the next shift we worked together. We sat in the ambulance in the station bay with my laptop balanced on the center console, and I played all 4 videos back to back without saying a word. He watched in complete silence, his face illuminated by the screen glow, and when the last video finished, he just sat there for a long minute. Then he told me something he'd been holding back since March. He said that on that first call, the one with the silver pickup, when they'd been waiting for the medical examiner to arrive, he'd walked up the road a bit to stretch his legs, and he'd noticed the memorial cross, half buried and forgotten, and had this weird thought that maybe someone should clean it up, or at least make sure it was secure. But what stuck with him was that the plastic flowers on it looked fresh. Not new, but not 5 years weathered either. Like someone had replaced them recently. He'd written it off at the time, figured maybe family members still visited, but after the second accident he'd gone back to check. The flowers were different, older, more faded, like they'd aged months in the span of weeks. That's when we decided we needed to talk to someone official about this. Not our supervisor, who would have thought we'd lost our minds, but someone in law enforcement who might actually have access to historical data. Ethan had a contact at the State Police Traffic Division, a sergeant named Brianna Wolfe, who'd been investigating fatal accidents for over 15 years. We met her at a diner off Interstate 80 on our day off. Brought all my documentation and the dash cam footage on a thumb drive. She listened to everything we had to say, looked through the notes, and I could see her expression shift from polite skepticism to genuine concern. She told us she'd need a few days to pull some files, but she'd look into it. A week later, she called me and asked if we could meet again. When we sat down, she had a manila folder about 2 inches thick sitting on the table in front of her. She'd gone back through every fatal accident report on Route 34 for the past 20 years. What she found made my skin go cold. There had been 19 fatal single-vehicle accidents on that exact stretch of road since 2013, all within that same 100-foot radius, all during those early morning hours. 19 people dead in the same spot where Claire Hutchins had died. Brianna pulled out another document from the folder, this one older and more worn. It was the full investigation report from Claire's accident in 2013, not just the newspaper summary I'd found. According to the responding officers, Claire had called 911 approximately 4 minutes before her crash. The call log showed she'd reported seeing flashing emergency lights on the shoulder of Route 34 near mile marker 18. Thought maybe there was an accident or a stranded motorist, and was slowing down to see if someone needed help. That was the last anyone heard from her. When emergency services arrived, they found her vehicle wrapped around the pole. No sign of any other car or any reason for lights to have been there. The investigating officer had noted in his report that it was possible Claire had been confused or drowsy from her late shift, maybe hallucinated the lights due to fatigue. But Brianna had highlighted something else in the report that made everything click into place. The utility pole Claire hit had been marked for replacement 3 weeks before her accident. The county had installed a temporary warning beacon on it, a solar-powered strobe light to alert drivers that work crews would be in the area. Except the beacon had malfunctioned the night Claire died. It had gotten stuck in a loop, flashing erratically, and because it was solar-powered and positioned right at eye level for approaching drivers, it created this disorienting strobe effect that could make you lose your sense of depth and distance. Brianna explained that after Claire's death, the county removed the pole and the beacon, did the utility work, and everyone moved on. But here's what nobody had accounted for. That malfunctioning beacon had been mounted at the exact height and angle where modern LED light bars sit on emergency vehicles. And for drivers approaching from the west during those early morning hours, when you're tired and the road is empty and dark, your brain could still register an afterimage or a reflection pattern in that spot, especially if you were already primed to look for it because of the memorial cross. She'd brought in a traffic psychology expert who explained it to her, something called highway hypnosis combined with expectation bias. Drivers would see the cross, their subconscious would register it as a danger marker, and in that vulnerable state of late-night driving, their minds would fill in what they expected to see. Emergency lights, another accident, something to avoid. They'd swerve right, overcorrect, and lose control. The dashcam footage showing those flashes was likely lens flare from our own light bar, reflecting off the metal markers on the shoulder, but our brains interpreted it as separate lights because we expected to see an accident. We were literally creating the pattern we were trying to respond to. Brianna had already contacted the county highway department, and they agreed to remove the memorial cross and install proper warning signs and rumble strips along that section. They were also going to improve the shoulder lighting and add guardrails to prevent vehicles from hitting the utility poles. The county finished the work in December of 2018. They moved Claire's memorial to the cemetery where she was actually buried, installed reflective warning signs a quarter-mile before that section of road, and put in those rumble strips that shake your whole car if you drift toward the shoulder. They also replaced every utility pole in that area with breakaway models that collapse on impact instead of acting like solid walls. It's been over 6 years now, and we haven't responded to a single fatal accident on that stretch of Route 34. A few fender benders, one DUI who hit the guardrail and walked away with bruises, but nothing like what we saw in 2018. Ethan retired 2 years ago, moved to Arizona to be near his daughter, and we still text sometimes. He told me he drives past that section whenever he visits, just to see the new signs and know that it worked. I still work for County Ambulance, still run calls on Route 34, and sometimes during those quiet early morning hours, I'll slow down near mile marker 18 just to remind myself that the mind can be more dangerous than anything supernatural. 19 people died because of a broken light, a memorial cross, and the way our brains try to make sense of patterns in the dark. That's what keeps me up at night now. Not ghosts or curses, but the realization that sometimes the scariest things are just tragic coincidences that snowball into something worse. The road doesn't eat people anymore. We fixed it. But I'll never forget how close we came to just accepting it as bad luck and moving on.